Okay, so our final unit for the course is exploring Shakespeare, which is Hamlet. And we explore Shakespeare for numerous reasons. One, we're looking at a form of literature, classic literature it's part of our history as a Western country, as a country that studies English literature. We always look at Shakespeare as an example of that. Shakespeare does play a role within our collective society. It is, and his themes and ideas and messages and how he even constructs his stories. We can see that in many modern interpretations of books and of movies, films, TV shows. There are numerous times I've watched a television show and thought, oh, this is totally a Shakespearean tragedy. Just because of the structure and format. So it does give us that. It also allows us to sort of see the progression of how individuals are portrayed in history. Shakespeare does many things. One of his complaints is that he writes from his perspective of his time period, which is, can be considered racist. He doesn't necessarily always portray people of color in his books in the right way or place into stereotypes. For example, in Othello, he's a Moor, which is a Northern African. So you can look at someone who's being sub-Saharan, sort of more Arabic looking, to someone who is darker skinned, kind of like me. And his portrayal of the Moors was that they were passionate people, prone to emotion that overrides their reason, right? And that's a stereotype of people of color, right? Or Black people, right? That we're overly emotional and will get caught up in our passions, right? His portrayal of women hasn't been great as well. His female characters tend to be passive. They tend to not really drive the story. Even some of his greatest, more passionate, more straightforward characters, for example, I'll say Lady Macbeth, when you just deconstruct her, she literally is basically taking Macbeth's ambition out of his body and giving it physical form in Lady Macbeth. Because when Macbeth gains all his confidence and strength, she just dies, right? In Othello, they talk about Desdemona knows Othello's going to kill her, goes to the bedroom and waits for him to murder her, even though she's done nothing wrong. And then after he murders her, her last words are, "Don't blame Othello." Right? Again, this is very, very almost passive, like she's so good and she's so nice that, even in her dying breath, after being murdered for doing nothing but loving her husband, she still feels the need to defend her husband, right? Now, part of it is maybe a construction of showing us how good she is and how foolish Othello looks for killing her. But again, the characters tend to be not really developed. Merchant of Venice is a little different, where the main character the main female character does save the main character from the villain, which is Shylock. But she's also has to pretend to be a man in order to do so. And it doesn't also help that when Shakespearean plays were first created and acted, it was women were allowed to act. So it was men dressing as women to play those roles. So for a character like Portia, I think in Merchant of Venice, when she has to pretend to be a lawyer to help her love of her life out of a situation, it's a man dressed as a woman who then is pretending to be a man, which is very confusing. Anyway, we look at Shakespeare and all those different things. So I want you to be mindful of it. Again, some people love and defend Shakespeare. That's fine. I think they're very good merit in reading Shakespeare. It's great. I like some of his plays. I do. But I think it's also fair to deconstruct him. And I think it's fair to sort of talk about the flaws in his writing, and not just as matters of, well, this is how people wrote at the time, or this is people's opinion of women or visible minorities or anything else at the time, but to call them the question like, hey, how do you have effective stories if some of the characters are one-dimensional pieces that are only there to push the story forward, or at least to acknowledge that that's the role of women in literature in his plays at this time. Okay, so having said that, I just want to review a couple of things with you. I'm not going to write them on the board. You might have heard this several times. If I've taught you, if Zach's taught you, if any teacher has taught you in English, I want to review a couple of things. That one, we're reading Hamlet, and Hamlet is a tragedy. Now, Hamlet, Shakespeare wrote historical plays, which recounted the events of characters in history. So like Antony and Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, those were accounts of those individuals at their time period. He wrote comedies, which are a lot like tragedies, except that no one dies at the end. Everything gets resolved, right? And it's things are orders come put back, and no one actually, people suffer, but they don't, or bad guys suffer, but no one actually dies, right? You can talk about Merchant of Venice, that Shylock is stripped of his money and is stripped of, is not allowed to be, has to convert to Christianity, even though he's Jewish, as a symbolic death, but he doesn't really actually die, right? And he wrote tragedies. We tend to study tragedies in high school a lot. It's probably the ones that deal with a lot of the themes and ideas and messages that we talk about. And in tragedies, a couple things you need to understand. Number one, the characters, the tragedy is set at a time where an orderly society becomes chaotic, right? And then through the play, that chaotic society returns to order by natural actions, right? It is also based on the idea of the Elizabethan great chain of beings. And I think quite a few have taught, it's great chain of beings is simply a system in place that Elizabethans at that time believed that the world was ordered and on a caste-based system, that the universe puts you in a certain level and a certain ranking depending upon your status, right? Now, at the top of this ranking is God, right? Followed by archangels and angels. Then you have the king. You can also have the pope as people who are God's representatives, right? And then you have the royal bloodline from those groups, from the king, the queen, the princes. We know that according to this time, that men are the only ones who can actually inherit power. So even though the king and queen, if the king dies, the son becomes a king, the mother becomes a queen mother or queen regent, a figurehead that holds just sort of ceremonial power, but not actual power. Unless there are no male heirs, then the queen becomes in charge, and then then their children become after that. And again, if there's a male heir child, they become leader. If there is a female, she becomes leader only if there are no male heirs. It also goes by your age. And then there's different levels of nobles, knights, and there's commoners. So their belief is that there's this natural order to the universe. And, sometimes people lose their station in life, right? That, if a king is acting in a way that hurts his people, the belief that God would allow him to die, allowing him to pass, and then naturally speaking, the next person in line would take that throne, right? So people can move up or go down according to this great chain of beings based upon natural circumstances, right? The king has two children, a boy and a girl. The boy is older and he's first. He dies. They don't have any more children. He wants to pass on his crown. It's going to go to his daughter, right? That's a natural order of things. What can happen in the great chain of beings is if a character or individual tries to change the order of it through actions, right? So in Macbeth, we know that Macbeth attempts to become the king or becomes a king by murdering the previous king, right? And then because of the murder, everyone's freaked out and they all leave. The next heirs leave because they feel they're under threat. So they elect Macbeth to become king because they need a leader, right? Macbeth's journey to become king isn't a natural order. It isn't the king died and he was next in line. It isn't the king abdicated the throne and said, I want Macbeth to take my place because I think he's more suited than my children, right? It wasn't any of that stuff. It was simply he murdered the king to achieve power. So there is a disruption in this great chain of beings. And they believe that when this happens, society goes into some chaotic mess, right? Whether it's environmental, they'll talk about the fact that in many plays, it's constantly raining and there's a storm outside representing like the society falling apart. It talks about the management of the countries. You might end up in a war with another country that you weren't supposed to be in because everything's chaotic. Sometimes in plays, they get very dramatic. They talk about the fact that a man sees a duck eating a horse, or flowers that don't bloom. They would recount things in nature that are at odds or don't happen, and they would say it as this is the reason that there's a break in the great chain of beings. But like the laws of physics, the great chain of being is supposed to basically recorrect itself, right? So if I suck all the air out of this room, it's a vacuum. But if I poke a little hole next to the next wall that has oxygen in there, oxygen will rush into here because that's how physics works, right? It's going to replace that. Same thing with great chain of beings, that no matter how much someone tries to adjust it to their own liking against the natural order of the universe will snap back. So in all these plays, when there is disruption to the great chain of beings, usually the people who are supposed to be in charge, if not the family, but the next royal or someone of royal bloodline from a neighboring country can take over, because technically speaking, they are of the bloodline responsible for leadership. That's what's going to happen. So remember those two, that's how a tragedy happened. It is a story in which the orderly society goes into chaos by some event, right? Someone attempts to do something. Sometimes it's a breaking of this chain of the natural order of the universe. And then there's a chaotic time followed by a restoration of the order of the universe by some sort of natural act. Now, another thing about tragedies you have to understand is that most of the characters die. You're usually left with only one or two characters left, and their job is to tell the story to everyone else who is a survivor, right? And usually the person who dies, the person is the name of the book. So in Romeo and Juliet die, in Macbeth die, in Othello dies, King Lear dies. Usually, if you are in a Shakespearean tragedy and the play is called Kathy's gonna start crying because she knows, oh, I'm gonna die by the end of this, because that's how Shakespearean tragedies happen. Okay, so one last thing after that. So we talked about what plays that Shakespeare wrote. We talked about what a tragedy is. We talked about it being disruptive, flow of the natural order of the universe by usually a person who wishes to change it. And then there's chaotic times in which the universe resets itself, and the people who are supposed to be in those positions of power are returned in some form or fashion. We talked about the fact that all the main characters die, right? With one or two surviving to be the storytellers and recount the story to other people who weren't major characters, but were there when all the major characters ended up dying, either by murder or a broken heart or any of those things they talk about. The next thing we need to talk about is that these tragedies start a tragic hero, right? And a tragic hero is a person who is held in high esteem, which means everyone likes a tragic hero. Everyone likes them. They are generally well-liked. Even if there's conflict between peoples and groups, they tend to look at this individual outside of it. So in Romeo and Juliet, the Capulets and Montagues are fighting, but everyone likes Romeo, right? Even the Capulets, even the Montagues the Capulets who hate the Montagues, which Romeo is a Montague, the head Capulet would say, leave Romeo alone. He's a nice enough kid. He's not involved in the brawling, not involved in some of the stuff's going on. Everyone likes Romeo. Same with Juliet. Everyone likes Juliet. And Macbeth, everyone likes him because he's the one who wins the war. And Othello, he definitely defends Venice from an invasion. The tragic hero is someone that everyone likes. So everyone likes Hamlet. Hamlet's a moody guy, but everyone likes him. However, these characters have a fatal character flaw, right? That eventually leads to the downfall. So that means the characters have something within them that is a flaw within their character. And this flaw will always get them killed. Okay, so for Romeo and Juliet, their flaw is their love for each other, right? Their obsessive love for each other. They love each other so much that they throw aside their values, they throw aside their money, how they've lived all their lives to be together. And when doing that, everyone around them dies, including them. Macbeth's flaw is his ambition, right? He wants to become king so bad that when told in a prophecy that he will become king, He then does it. He didn't have the king killed because he feels, well, I should have this because I'm an ambitious person. I was told that I become king, so therefore I'm going to become king. So everyone has these fatal flaws that get them killed. Sometimes, and most times, these fatal flaws are actual strengths in other situations. That Macbeth's ambition is a strength in a society, in a war, right? An ambitious person in war is a person who's going to win. Right? He walks into a battlefield that's just brutal and it's primitive and people die all the time. And he says, yep, I'm going to win and I'm going to beat everyone back. And he usually does. When you look at Romeo and Juliet, their sense of love for each other allows them to put aside clan hatred and familiar connection that is the cornerstone of their society. They're willing to put aside the what could be decades and decades of hostility between two families to be together, right? That's a very, very powerful thing to be able to say, hey, I'm going to step away from this hate that I grew up in, and I'm going to do something new, right? That obsession for each other allows them to do that. These are good things. But that obsession in the wrong way gets people killed. So for Hamlet, as we look at him, we're going to read, Hamlet is a person whose fatal flaw is he overthinks things. Hamlet is a person who cannot act for any shape or reason unless he's 100% sure that his actions are correct. The problem is no action is 100% knowable, right? So Hamlet can only act when he knows what's going to happen 100% of the time. And the only thing that I can tell you right now as a human being is that you will eventually die. It's the only surety of life. Everything else is a series of, you might get it, how you get it, you could get it, you most definitely get it, right? And because Hamlet can't process in his mind that, hey, I need whatever decision he makes to be 100% correct, and he can't change, it eventually gets him killed. Because what happens to him in the story is that he's unwilling to commit an act until he knows for sure that things happen the way he does. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to show you this fine little clip that sort of breaks down Hamlet and an overall plot that we'll look at, and then we'll talk a little about it. Then I'll talk about the themes and ideas and the major things, and then that should take us to break. So give me a second to set it up on YouTube, and then we'll continue on with this. So I'm going to stop this part or pause this part of the recording, and we'll come back to it a little later. Okay, so that was just, again, so you watched that, it gave you sort of funny recount of someone sort of mocking a thug who was giving a breakdown of Hamlet, and it was a more detailed one. So again, this should help you follow the plot. We all know that Shakespeare the language is challenging. Again, think of Shakespeare when you hear it and watch it, that you are being more figurative than literal, that what we're looking for is your understanding of the figurative information, which means that when you watch Shakespeare or listen to Shakespeare, they're attempting to talk to you using figurative language. It's not saying Kathy's hair is nice. It's her hair like raven night, glistening across the wind, beautiful yet flowing, right? Same thing, but they're doing it in a way to make you envision it. Because remember, when they made these plays, it wasn't like they had effects and makeup and things that were as detailed as what we have today. So a lot of times the words are the ones that color the imagery. And Shakespeare, again, his plays weren't meant for high class. They were designed for the low classes, right? They were considered lowbrow. They were the Michael Bay of his time. He was the guy who directs the Fast and Furious movies of his time. They're about sex and violence and all these things, and people loved it. In fact, if you knew anything, like when we use the word the peanut gallery, it talks about the fact that in the sitting arrangement, you had people of higher status and class, but these nice seats, but in the pits, in the bottom, there would be people there all clamored together for individuals who couldn't afford those seats, and they would have food, and they would throw food and peanuts. They would sometimes talking out the actors if they felt bored. And that was a sort of an element of watching Shakespeare at the time. Okay, so having said that, what I also want to do is I want to screen share something else. And it's just a breakdown of some notes that I have for you that you can look at. Right, so again, so a breakdown of Hamlet. Hamlet is a Shakespearean tragedy about a young prince who sets out to uncover and later revenge the murder of his father, the old king, spurred on by his father's ghost. Hamlet is one of the biggest parts in any Shakespeare play, and there are lots of opportunities to explore his choices and motivations, as well as lots of themes that you can use as rust into the text, including the following. Corruption, right? We talked about the fact that Hamlet deals with corruption in the play a lot. He sees it all around him. Again, his uncle killed his father to steal both his throne and his wife, right? Polonius, who is the new sort of chief of staff, is a guy who spies on people to gain information on them to then use it as disadvantage, right? He sees everyone, and Hamlet also gets angry because his father dies, and within a month later, his mother remarries. Right now, again, in Christian ideology, you die, your husband dies, you're supposed to wait about a year, right? The fact that she gets married so quickly and sort of like almost abandons the love of her husband to be with her brother is weird. In other cultures, it's not that big a deal, but in his culture, it's kind of weird. So he thinks that he thinks his mother's corrupt. He thinks the entire court is corrupt because they go along with it and don't ever question or say anything. So let's deal with that. There's also revenge, right? Hamlet is a play about him getting revenge. And again, he's told by the ghost of his dead father that he's been killed and he should seek revenge, right? We've always seen this in films where the characters are motivated by some other force outside them that says there's been a wrong and these characters go on revenge. But because Hamlet's nature, because Hamlet's inability to act, he can't gain revenge. At the same time, you'll see two other characters, or watch two other characters, Fortinbras and Laertes, both two other royals who lost their father. Fortinbras, his father was Old Fortinbras. He fought Hamlet's father, Old Hamlet, for control of Denmark. Old Hamlet killed Old Fortinbras in straight up political combat, but young Fortinbras is so bothered by it, he seeks a new war to gain revenge for his father. Right? Laertes is the son of Polonius, and Polonius is killed by Hamlet. Laertes doesn't know who kills him, and initially comes back to the kingdom after being away with a sword and a gang of people wanted to kill the king because he seeks revenge. When he finds out it's Hamlet, he wants to kill Hamlet because he seeks revenge. So the idea that of the children getting vengeance for the death of their parents is big, and the characters are motivated by it, except for Hamlet, who wants revenge, but won't do anything unless he's absolutely sure that the ghost is telling him the truth. He's absolutely sure that Claudius did this, and then when he kills him, he has to be absolutely sure that the way he kills him is a way that he doesn't go to heaven. Appearance versus reality are two different things, right? The idea of how things seem and what they really are. So again, the marriage of Claudius and Gertrude seems to be something that's based on just luck situation. The reality is one person has made one person has manipulated the situation to achieve the goal. Hamlet appears to act crazy in order to be able to move around and gather information about Claudius. In reality, he's not crazy. He's making the choice to behave in that way in order to gain insight. So appearance reality is a big deal. Now, these things talk about scenes you should go over. I'm not going to break down each individual one because that would take some time, but I encourage you to read this because it does sort of identify the key scenes that you need to know for the play, right? You've watched a couple of overall breakdowns. This handout sort of talks about the key things that you would need to know. So if in your studying of Hamlet, if you're saying, well, what's important? This sort of breaks down, like in Act 1, scenes 2 and 5 are the most important. Not that they're all important, but they would give us the most information. Scene 2 sort of tells us more about Polonius and the relationship with his children, which is Ophelia, Hamlet's girlfriend, and Laertes, right? Also, I want to point out that there's always been the intention, or some people have interpreted that Laertes is a little too obsessed with his sister's sexuality, and it could hint to perhaps an incestuous feelings that Laertes has for his sister. He says, again, it's a line in the play, he says, he's telling her to stay away from Hamlet because he's dangerous and he just was going to abuse her. And she says, he says, now remember what I told you. And she says, yes, I've locked it away, the secret you told me, and only you have the key, which is a kind of a weird sexual thing. Like, well, why does your brother have the key to your feelings? That doesn't make any sense. So it's not super evident, but there's an incestuous feeling going on here. The same way that Hamlet's obsession over his mother and Claudius is a little incestuous, right? He always talks about their sex life and their soiled sheets. And, you know, there's been interpretations of the play when Hamlet goes to confront his mother, he's on top of her and he's kind of grabbing her, that, you know, it's a weird kind of almost assault. Not that he does anything, but I've seen it played where it's almost like Hamlet is going to assault her, but he's screaming at her. So there is an aspect of incestuous behavior. Scene 3, Act 1, Scene 1 is to be or not to be speech, which is important. That's key for our last assignment for Hamlet, for one group, to be able to interpret that. And then there's the play. Again, we talked about the fact that Hamlet wants to catch the king, so he has the actors reenact the play of the murder to test Claudius's reaction. And when Claudius freaks out about it, Hamlet knows to do that Claudius has killed his father. Now, the weird thing about it in the play is that he doesn't do anything about it. When he could kill Claudius, he doesn't do it because Claudius is praying, and he's afraid that if you pray and ask for forgiveness, you'll go to heaven. The issue is while Claudius does pray, he doesn't really ask for forgiveness. He's not really sorry about what he did, so he isn't technically under the rules, doesn't go to heaven. So Hamlet could have done something, but chooses not to because he has to be absolutely sure that what he's doing is right. Then we find out how Claudius plots and manipulates the situation, again, by getting Hamlet's two best friends to spy on him, and then to get him to England, and then giving him a note saying, asking him to kill Hamlet. All right. Then you've got the situation where Hamlet kills Polonius. Then Hamlet becomes banished. Then you have Laertes returning to Denmark to seek revenge. And then the king, seeing that, they're manipulating Laertes into putting the blame on Hamlet and getting the blame off of him. And then Act 5, Scene 2 is a tragic climax where we find out that, you know, as the king has turned Laertes against Hamlet, he's told Laertes to enter into a duel with him so he could poison the blades and poison his drink, and Hamlet appears died during the duel. Again, the idea here is that Claudius can't move against Hamlet. He can't do anything, so he has to find these proxies, whether it's asking the king of England to kill Hamlet for him so that doesn't look like he's guilty, or having Laertes engage in a battle and Hamlet dying. He can say, oh, I guess, you know, someone scratched someone, they got infected, something happened. But the idea is for Claudius to remove Hamlet because he knows that Hamlet is coming after him. And again, when we look at the character and what Hamlet does, he really doesn't do anything until he's poisoned, Laertes is poisoned, his mother's poisoned and then dies. Will he do anything to act? So again, Hamlet is a person that waits way too long to act, and then when he only acts when he's 100% sure. So he kills Claudius at the end because he knows through Laertes' confession that Claudius is behind everything, right? He kills Claudius because he sees that his mother dies from the wine that he's supposed to drink, so he knows the wine's poison. That's the only time he acts, right? Even when he kills other characters, like when he kills Polonius, he thinks it's the king and therefore acts because he feels, well, I can do that. When he's going to be sent to England, he switches the letters for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and has the letter say that they should kill those Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, his two best friends, because he feels he's in a danger and feels he has to manipulate the situation. So important thing to know about Hamlet, he doesn't really act unless he's 100% sure. And when he does, he does. So when you're looking at Hamlet, remember, it's never a situation where Hamlet can't kill people, right? He has. He's totally capable of acting within the rules of society and murdering people to achieve his goals. But he doesn't. He always chooses and opts to overthink a situation, right? Because he doesn't know anything for sure. So the key thing to Hamlet, you always have to keep in mind, Hamlet cannot act unless he's 100% sure that he's right. And because we're never 100% sure of everything, Hamlet doesn't act, right? And when you study the to be or not to be speech, the grade 12s do analysis, the speech is basically who Hamlet is, right? That when push comes to shove, he will always choose to deal with a known situation versus an unknown future, right? So if you say that if Hamlet has had chicken every day of his life, so Hamlet have a piece of steak, he would reject that because he says, I don't know what's going to happen when I eat that steak, right? He can say, I hate chicken, absolutely hate it. I'm so sick and tired of it. I don't want to eat more chicken. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. Someone offers him something else, he'll say, well, I probably shouldn't, even though I want to try something else. I don't know what the other thing is going to be like. Since I don't know, I won't choose, and therefore I'll keep on eating that lovely, lovely, lovely chicken, right? Any questions?
No.
Good. Any one-word answers?
No.
See?
What?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, see? Awesome, gotcha. These are just key scenes that you could review, but again, because we're going through the play pretty quickly, you can look at this. Again, these are handouts that you can see. Also, here's a list of, again, important scenes and just questions. Again, I'm not making you do this. If this was a school year, I would probably have this. And then as we read or go over or watch, I would say these were discussion questions we would go over in class, but we're not doing that because of just the amount of time we have left in the class. Okay, so are there any questions about Hamlet? Any things that you're worried about and understanding and interpreting who Hamlet, what Hamlet is? Please ask me now.
No.
Great, you've got that one word answer thing down perfectly. Patrick, I'm proud of you. Okay, so it's 10:08. I'm moved faster than I thought I would. So what I'll probably do is I will stop this share. I will stop this recording.